Before he could process any more of the questions swirling in his head, Princess Lyra stepped forward, her eyes scanning the crowd. She paused for a moment, and then her gaze locked onto Jake's once more. There was something in her eyes, a glint of recognition, as if she had found exactly who she was looking for. She began to walk toward him, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Her steps were graceful, measured, and every movement seemed purposeful. Jake, still in a daze, couldn't move. His legs felt like they were made of lead, and all he could do was watch as she drew closer. When she reached him, she stopped just a few feet away. Her presence was overwhelming, powerful, yet calming at the same time. It was as if the air itself had changed, and everything around him had become secondary to her. "Jake Thompson," she said, her voice clear and soft. "I have come to ask for your help. I have come to ask for your hand." Jake blinked, thinking he must have heard her wrong. His name. His hand. Was she asking him to marry her? I don't understand," he stammered, taking a step back. "You don't even know me. Why would you ask?" Princess Lyra held up a hand, silencing him gently. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or at least it seemed like one. The sky was a bit cloudy, and the sun had that early morning haze to it, casting a soft glow over the city. Jake Thompson, a 25-year-old mechanic, had just finished his morning coffee and was heading toward the garage where he worked. His day was planned to be just like every other, fixing cars, answering calls, and getting through the endless list of customers who always seemed to need something at the last minute. Jake wasn't a special guy. He didn't have any extraordinary talents. He wasn't a famous scientist, a wealthy entrepreneur, or a decorated soldier. He was just a regular guy with a simple life, a small apartment, and a love for tinkering with engines. But all of that was about to change. It started with a loud, screeching sound. It was unlike anything Jake had ever heard, like metal scraping against metal, but amplified, almost as if the sound was coming from the very sky itself. Jake paused in his tracks and looked up, squinting against the morning light. The noise grew louder, and that's when he saw it. A massive craft appeared in the sky, so large that it seemed to take up half the horizon. It wasn't like anything Jake had ever seen before. It wasn't a plane, not a drone, and certainly not a weather balloon. It was sleek, metallic, and had a strange shimmering glow around it. The craft moved slowly at first, like it was descending from some great height, but as it came closer to the ground, it became clear that it was heading straight for the open field on the outskirts of town. Jake's heart started to race, and he quickly ran toward the field, curiosity pulling him forward. A small crowd had already gathered, looking up in awe at the object in the sky. There were whispers of it being a UFO, but no one seemed quite sure. Then the ship landed. It wasn't a violent crash landing, but a smooth and controlled descent, like the ship had been guided by some unseen force. When it touched down, it made no noise, and the ground didn't shake. The air around the craft seemed to hum with energy, and for a moment, everything was still. Jake stood at the edge of the crowd, a mixture of excitement and disbelief rushing through him. He wasn't sure what to do, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the strange vessel. The craft was silent, but after a moment, a hatch on its side slowly opened, revealing a ramp leading down to the ground. A soft, ethereal glow spilled out from the ship, casting a silvery light onto the field below. And then she appeared. The figure that emerged from the ship was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. She was tall and graceful, with an elegance that seemed out of place on Earth. Her skin was pale, almost glowing, and her eyes were an unnatural shade of violet. Her long, flowing hair shimmered like strands of silver, cascading down her back in waves. She wore a flowing gown that looked both regal and otherworldly, as if it had been woven from stardust itself. For a moment, Jake stood frozen, unable to move or speak. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming, hallucinating, or if this was some strange form of reality. The woman, no, the princess, looked down at the crowd with calm, intelligent eyes, her gaze meeting Jake's for a brief, intense moment. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft yet commanding. It carried an authority that made everyone in the crowd fall silent, as if they were listening to something ancient and powerful. "People of Earth," she said, her voice echoing through the field, "I come from a distant world. My name is Princess Lyra of the Zelvarian Empire." The name sounded almost familiar, but Jake couldn't place it. Zelvarian. It wasn't a place he had ever heard of. He glanced around at the others, but they all seemed just as stunned and confused as he was. "Why are you here?" someone in the crowd called out, their voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. Princess Lyra turned her gaze toward the person who had spoken, her expression soft but resolute. "I have come to seek an alliance," she said. "An alliance between your people and mine. A union that will benefit both of our worlds." A murmur rippled through the crowd. An alliance? With Earth? The idea was too outlandish for most people to process. Jake's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. What kind of alliance? What did she mean by union? And why Earth? Why now? She nodded solemnly. "Yes. A test. Before I can ask you to become my partner, I must know if you are truly worthy of the responsibility. The strength of your world, of you, needs to be proven." Jake blinked. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't know what you're talking about." Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, but there was still an unmistakable air of determination around her. "That is exactly why I need to know, Jake. Your world is full of people like you, ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in others. Your strength does not lie in your muscles or your training. It lies in your mind and your heart." She waved her hand, and the air seemed to shimmer with energy. Jake felt a cold breeze rush past him, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was almost like the atmosphere was changing around them, becoming charged with something that felt both strange and familiar. "Come with me," Lyra said, motioning toward the ship. The ship's door slid open, and as they entered, Jake was hit with the smell of something sweet, almost floral, and a soft blue light illuminated the interior. It wasn't a traditional spacecraft like the ones he had seen in movies. It was clean and sleek, with curved walls and surfaces that seemed to shift and adapt as they walked through them. The floor felt soft underfoot, like walking on a plush carpet, yet there was no obvious material it was made of. Lyra led him through the corridors of the ship, and they arrived at a small circular chamber. It looked like a training area or a lab, but it was hard to say for sure. There were various pieces of equipment that Jake didn't recognize, but the room had an air of purpose. Something was going to happen here, and Jake could feel it in his gut. "Before we begin, let me explain the test," Lyra said, turning toward him. "You must prove to me that you understand what it means to be human. There are 3 parts to this trial: physical, mental, and emotional." Jake couldn't help but scoff. "Physical? Mental? Emotional? You're really going to make me run a gauntlet or something?" Lyra's face remained serious. "It is not a gauntlet, Jake, but a series of trials that will show me how you think, how you react under pressure, and how you handle the weight of your decisions." The first part, the physical test, came first. Jake wasn't the fittest guy on the block, but he wasn't weak either. He could handle a few basic challenges, right? Or so he thought. A large metallic sphere appeared in the center of the room, and Lyra stepped aside. "This will be your first challenge. You must move this sphere from one side of the room to the other." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's it. Just move this ball." Lyra smiled slightly. "It is not as simple as it seems." The sphere was large, almost the size of a small car, and it was made of a smooth, featureless metal. It didn't have handles or any obvious way to grab it, but Jake was determined to give it a try. He approached it cautiously and pushed with all his might. To his surprise, the sphere didn't budge. Jake grunted, putting more force into it, but the sphere didn't move an inch. "What the hell? This thing weighs a ton." Lyra watched him intently, her expression unreadable. The test is not about brute strength, Jake. It is about understanding. Jake paused, trying to catch his breath. Understanding what? Think, Jake. How would you approach a challenge like this on Earth? She asked. Jake frowned. It wasn't just about moving the ball. It was about figuring out a solution. Suddenly, an idea hit him. He turned toward the walls of the chamber, searching for something. On one side, there was a small platform with various tools, including ropes, pulleys, and levers. Jake quickly grabbed a rope and tied it around the sphere, securing it tightly. Then, using the pulley system, he applied just enough force to make the sphere slowly slide across the room, inch by inch. It was a slow process, but it worked. Lyra watched him closely, nodding approvingly. You did not rely on brute force, Jake. You used ingenuity. This is the essence of humanity's strength. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling a little more confident. But he knew there were still 2 more tests to go, and they wouldn't be any easier. The next test was mental, and it came quickly. Lyra led him to a holographic table in the center of the room, where a series of complex puzzles appeared, floating in the air. Shapes, numbers, and patterns shifted and changed before Jake's eyes. This is a test of your intellect, Lyra explained. You must solve the puzzle in 3 minutes. Jake stared at the floating shapes, the gears in his mind starting to turn. It was a pattern game, something he could handle, he thought. The clock started, and Jake's hands moved quickly, arranging the pieces in the correct order. It took every ounce of focus he had, but after 2 minutes, he finally clicked the last piece into place. A holographic puzzle faded away, and Jake let out a relieved breath. You have passed the mental test, Jake. Your mind works quickly, and you adapt well under pressure. Jake smirked, wiping his hands on his jeans. I've done plenty of puzzles in my day, just didn't expect one like that. Lyra nodded. The final test is the most difficult, Jake. It is an emotional test. I must know if you can handle the burden of leadership, the weight of responsibility. Jake frowned. What does that mean? What do you expect me to do? Lyra's face became more serious, and she stepped closer to him. This test requires you to make a decision, one that will not only affect you, but others as well. It is about sacrifice, Jake, about understanding what is at stake, and having the courage to act, even when the consequences are heavy. Suddenly, the room shifted. A screen appeared, showing images of Earth, people working, families laughing, cities bustling with life. Then, the images changed to something darker: war, famine, chaos. There is a scenario in which your world is at risk, Lyra explained. You must decide how to save your people. Choose wisely, for there is no turning back. Jake's heart raced as he stared at the images. It was a moral dilemma. Would he sacrifice a few for the many, or would he risk everything for a chance at peace? After what felt like an eternity, Jake finally made his decision. He chose a path that would minimize the damage, even though it meant making tough calls. Lyra's eyes softened. You have passed. Your decision shows the heart of a leader. Jake stood there, his head still reeling from the weight of the emotional test. He hadn't expected any of this. But as he looked at Lyra, he realized that this wasn't just some random trial. It was a glimpse into the future of humanity, and his role in it. You've proven yourself, Jake, Lyra said, her voice full of respect. You are more than just a mechanic. You are someone who understands what it means to be human. Jake exhaled, feeling a mix of exhaustion and pride. I didn't think I'd make it through this. Lyra smiled, her face softening. You did more than just survive. You proved that humanity's strength is in its heart and mind. And with that, Jake knew that his life would never be the same again. Jake stood in the quiet of the room, the hum of the alien ship still vibrating in the air around him. He was still trying to process everything that had happened. 1 minute, he was just a regular mechanic, struggling to pay rent and fix cars. The next, he was in a spacecraft on a faraway world, being tested by an alien princess who claimed that he was the key to saving her people and his own. He had passed her trials, physical, mental, and emotional, and, in doing so, had proven that humanity, at least in some ways, was more advanced than even her most educated people had understood. But now, after all the tests, the reality of the situation was starting to settle in. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to look at him like he was some kind of hero. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who liked fixing cars. But here he was, standing in front of Princess Lyra, who had just called him the one person who could change the future of both her. Lyra stood across from him, her eyes serious, yet softer than before. She had been calm and composed through the trials, but now, as she spoke to him, Jake could hear the faintest hint of desperation in her voice. This was real. This wasn't some grand cosmic test or a training exercise. The stakes were real. Jake, I have seen the strength of your world. I have witnessed the depths of your mind, your spirit, and your heart. Lyra said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. But there is one thing I must ask you, one thing that will shake the future of both our worlds. It is not a test, but a plea. Jake frowned. A plea. Lyra nodded, her gaze never leaving his. Yes, I need you to understand that my people are facing a crisis. Our world, Zelveria, is dying. Our resources are depleted, and our technology, though advanced, is not enough to save us. We need an alliance, Jake. An alliance with Earth. But there is something more, something even deeper than politics. I need your help to secure this alliance. Lyra smiled softly, her hand gently resting on his. Failure is part of the journey, Jake. We all fail, but failure does not define us. It's what we do after failure that matters, and I believe you will rise to the challenge. I have seen your strength, even if you cannot see it in yourself. Jake stared at her hand on his, the warmth of her touch somehow grounding him in that moment. Her confidence in him was unwavering, but it still didn't ease the storm of doubts swirling in his mind. I don't know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I just don't know if I'm ready for this. I'm afraid of what's at stake. What if my choices hurt the people I'm trying to save? Lyra squeezed his hand, her grip reassuring. I know you're afraid, but you do not have to have all the answers. You simply need to show the people of Zelveria that there is a way forward, that there is hope. Hope is more powerful than any weapon, any technology. And you, Jake, are the key to unlocking that hope. Jake's mind was spinning, the weight of his decision heavy on his chest. He had promised Lyra that he would help, but could he really keep that promise? Could he really teach an entire species how to live again, when he was still trying to figure out how to live his own life? How could he teach others to be brave, when he himself was filled with fear? He turned to face Lyra, his voice shaky. I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to let your people down. But I don't even know where to start. Lyra's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him. You've already taken the first step, Jake. You've come this far, and that's what matters. The journey will not be easy, but you are not alone. I will be with you every step of the way. And together, we will find the answers. Jake let out a deep breath, his mind still racing. But I'm not a leader. I'm not a politician. I don't know how to fix an entire world. Lyra gave him a knowing look. You are more than you think, Jake. You have a gift. The ability to see the best in people, to bring out the good in them. That is what Zelveria needs. Not more leaders, not more politicians, but more people who care, people who feel. Jake shook his head, still unsure. I'm not sure I'm that person. Lyra smiled gently. I have seen it in you. You may not see it yet, but it is there. The heart of a leader, the soul of a healer. And that is what my people need. Jake stood in silence, taking it all in. He had so many doubts, so many fears, and yet There was something about Lyra's words that resonated deep within him. Maybe he didn't have all the answers. Maybe he wasn't the perfect person for this job. But Lyra was right about one thing. He had the capacity to care. He had the ability to understand, to connect, to listen. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key to saving her people. "I don't know if I'm ready," Jake said quietly, "but I'll try. I'll try to do whatever I can." Lyra's eyes brightened, and she placed both hands on his shoulders. "That is all I ask, Jake. That is all anyone can ask. And remember, you are not alone in this. Together, we will find the way." Jake nodded, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little lighter, but still present. He wasn't sure where the journey would take him, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away now. It was time to face the challenge, to take the next step forward. And whatever happened, he was going to give it his all. Jake's mind raced as he stood in front of the massive window, staring at the swirling vortex of stars outside. The ship had left the orbit of Zelvaria a few hours ago, and they were now headed toward a neighboring galaxy to begin their mission. Lyra stood beside him, her presence comforting, yet her silence felt heavy. He could feel the tension between them, the unspoken words hanging in the air. He had promised her he would help, that he would be the one to bring hope back to her people. But as time passed, the weight of that promise grew heavier. The reality of what he had agreed to hit him more and more with every passing minute. Zelvaria's fate, the survival of its people, the hope for a future, it all rested on his shoulders. His shoulders. A mechanic from Earth. A guy who had never been in a situation like this, who had no real experience in leadership or diplomacy, yet here he was, caught in the middle of a battle for the future of an entire species. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head. What if he failed? What if his actions only made things worse? What if he wasn't enough? Lyra's eyes softened, and a small, grateful smile spread across her face. "Thank you, Jake. You do not know how much this means to me, to my people. You are not just helping me, you are giving hope to an entire world." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll do whatever I can." Lyra's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "Together, Jake, we will build something greater than either of us could do alone. We will save my people. And we will save your world too." With that, the two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead heavy in the air between them. Jake wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. Jake stood on the balcony of the ship, gazing out at the stars. It had been a few days since Lyra had explained everything to him. The crisis on her world, Zelvaria, and the crucial role he was supposed to play in saving both her people and his own. Everything had moved so quickly that it was hard to grasp. One minute, he was a mechanic living a fairly normal life on Earth, and now, here he was, in a situation that could determine the future of two planets. It was overwhelming. The view from the ship was breathtaking. The stars sparkled like diamonds, stretching out as far as the eye could see. In the distance, Zelvaria's moon hung like a pale pearl, casting a soft glow across the endless void. But as beautiful as the view was, it did nothing to ease the anxiety gnawing at Jake's mind. The weight of his decision was beginning to settle on him like a heavy, unshakable burden. He had agreed to help Lyra. He had promised to do everything in his power to help save her people, to show them hope again. But the more he thought about it, the more complicated it became. What if he failed? What if his attempt to help only made things worse? Jake wasn't a leader. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't even sure if he was the right person for the job. He was just a regular guy who liked fixing things. How could he possibly help save an entire planet? How could he possibly teach an entire race of people how to live again? It seemed like too much for one person to bear. Jake felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Lyra standing behind him, her expression calm, but with a softness in her eyes that made him feel like she understood exactly what he was going through. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The weight of everything you're about to do is enormous, and you don't have to carry it alone. Jake sighed and leaned against the railing. I don't know, Lyra. It feels like too much. I agreed to help, but I never thought it would be like this. I'm not the right person for this. I'm just a guy. I'm not some hero or leader. Lyra stepped beside him, her violet eyes reflecting the stars. You don't have to be a hero. You just need to be human. She smiled faintly. The qualities that make you who you are, the compassion, the empathy, the ability to see the potential in others, those are the qualities my people have lost, and it is those very qualities that will help us heal. Jake turned to face her, a mixture of doubt and frustration in his eyes. I don't even know where to start. How can I teach people how to live again? I don't even know how to teach myself how to deal with all of this. Lyra nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I understand your hesitation, Jake. This is not easy. But remember this. It's not about having all the answers. It's about showing others that there is hope. That's what makes you unique. That's what makes you different from the people I've known. Jake wanted to believe her. He really did. But the fear inside him was strong. It was one thing to fix a broken-down car or even solve a simple problem on Earth. But this was bigger. This was the survival of an entire species. There was no room for error. I'm just not sure I'm cut out for this, Jake muttered, running a hand through his hair. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I make things worse instead of better? Lyra stepped closer to him, her voice more intense now. Jake, if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that there are no perfect answers. You cannot predict every outcome, but you can make decisions based on what you believe is right. You are here because I believe in you. I believe in your humanity, and that belief is not misplaced. Jake looked at her, still unsure. But what if I fail? What if I try my best, and it's not enough? What if I let you down? Lyra had been patient, kind, and endlessly supportive since they'd left her world behind. She kept telling him that he had everything he needed to succeed, that his humanity, his compassion, empathy, and willingness to care was the key. But the more Jake thought about it, the more uncertain he became. What if that wasn't enough? Jake. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him out of his spiral of doubt. He turned to face her. Her expression was calm, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a kind of sadness that only came from someone who carried the weight of an entire planet's future. I know this is difficult, she said softly. You are being asked to make a choice that no one should ever have to make. But you must choose, Jake. Your decision will affect both our worlds. The time to act is now. Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had known the moment would come, the moment when he would have to make a choice, but he hadn't realized how hard it would be. It wasn't just about his future anymore. It was about the future of an entire species, and not just Zelvaria. If he failed, the consequences wouldn't stop there. Earth could suffer too. There's so much at stake, Lyra, Jake said, his voice low. I can't keep pretending I'm the right person for this. I don't know if I can do it. What if I fail? What if everything falls apart? Lyra's eyes softened and she stepped closer to him. I understand your fear, Jake. But fear is not a reason to walk away. It is a reason to move forward. You've already proven your strength, your character. You've already shown me that you are willing to fight for something greater than yourself. Jake shook his head, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask for any of it. I was just trying to survive, you know. I didn't ask to be the one who saves your world. Lyra's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now, one that cut through Jake's doubt. No one ever chooses to be the hero, Jake. No one chooses the difficult path. But sometimes the path chooses you. And you, Jake, have already stepped onto it. There is no turning back now. Jake felt his chest tighten, his heart pounding in his ears. He wanted to walk away, to tell her that he couldn't do it. He wanted to go home to Earth, to forget all of this, to pretend that none of it was real. But deep down, he knew that wasn't an option. If he walked away now, Zelveria would fall, and Earth might follow. Then what am I supposed to do? Jake asked, his voice breaking. How can I do what you want me to do? How can I lead your people when I don't even know what I'm doing? Lyra placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. You are already leading them, Jake. You've already begun. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know everything. What matters is that you show them that they are not alone. You show them that there is hope. You show them that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way forward. Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt. But how do I do that? How do I make them believe in something they've lost hope in? Lyra gave him a small, sad smile. You have to be willing to believe, Jake. Believe in them. Believe in yourself. And believe that there is always something worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. He stared at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that he could be the person she thought he was. But the fear and the uncertainty were still there, gnawing at him. I'm scared, Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm enough for this. I don't know if I can live up to the person you think I am. Lyra's gaze softened, and she stepped even closer, her voice barely audible. It's okay to be scared, Jake. Fear does not make you weak. It makes you human. And your humanity is what makes you strong. It is what will guide you through this. Jake's words echoed in the room, and for a moment, everything felt heavy. The truth of the situation hung in the air like a dense fog, and no one spoke. But then Lyra stepped forward, her calm presence offering a sense of reassurance. Her eyes met Jake's, and for a brief moment, he saw a flash of gratitude in them. It is true, Lyra said, her voice smooth and confident. Zelveria has faced devastation, and we can no longer survive on our own. Our technology is failing, our food supplies are dwindling, and our people are on the edge of despair. But we believe that an alliance with Earth can give us the chance to rebuild, to create a future where both of our worlds can thrive. Jake nodded, grateful for her support. He had been nervous about speaking in front of the assembly, but Lyra's words gave him strength. She was right. This was their chance to make a difference. If they could unite their two worlds, if they could set aside their differences and work together, they could create something powerful. They could change the course of history. But there were obstacles ahead. Even if the humans and Zelverians agreed to the alliance, there were still so many questions left unanswered. How could they ensure that both sides would contribute equally? How could they build trust when the scars of the past were still fresh? A voice interrupted Jake's thoughts. One of the Zelverian delegates, a tall and imposing figure named Sarek, stood up from his seat. His deep blue skin seemed to shimmer as he moved, his face unreadable. We are willing to listen, human, Sarek said, his voice rich with authority. But why should we trust your kind? You are from a world that has ignored our plight for centuries. You have your own problems to solve. How can we be certain that you will not abandon us once your own situation improves? Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. Sarek's words were harsh, but they were also valid. He knew that trust between their two peoples would not come easily. The Zelverians had suffered for so long, and it wasn't unreasonable for them to be wary of Earth's intentions. I understand your concerns, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. And you're right. We can't change the past, but we have a chance to change the future. I can't promise that it will be easy, but I can promise that we won't abandon you. We've seen what can happen when two worlds choose to fight against each other. It only leads to destruction. What we need now is cooperation. We need to be united if we are going to survive. Sarek's piercing gaze never left Jake's, but after a long silence, the Zelverian nodded. You speak with conviction. We shall see if your actions match your words. Jake let out a quiet sigh of relief, but he knew the hard part was just beginning. There were many more questions to answer, many more doubts to overcome. The Zelvarians were willing to listen, but that didn't mean they would trust easily. A human delegate, a woman named Claire, stood up next. She was an expert in international diplomacy and had been chosen to represent Earth in these talks. Her face was stern, but there was a determination in her eyes that made Jake feel a little more hopeful. "If we are to form this alliance, we need to establish clear terms," Claire said. "What resources can we offer each other? How will we share technology? How will we address the threats we both face?" Jake nodded, grateful for the support. "Exactly. We need to approach this with practicality. We have resources on Earth, technology, agriculture, and manpower that could be useful in rebuilding Zelvaria. And in return, Zelvaria's advanced knowledge of energy production and environmental restoration could help Earth address our own crisis." Lyra spoke up again, her voice calm but urgent. "We can also share knowledge of medical advancements. We have developed treatments for diseases that Earth has not yet discovered. And there is the potential for trade in many areas: minerals, technology, food. Together, we can solve each other's problems, but we have to be willing to trust each other." Jake felt the room shift as the conversations began to flow. The delegates were no longer just questioning the feasibility of the alliance. They were starting to consider the possibilities. The tension in the room began to ease, and for the first time, Jake saw real hope in the eyes of the Zelvarians. There were still many obstacles to overcome. There would be debates, compromises, and challenges along the way. But in that moment, as the discussions moved forward, Jake felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: optimism. It was a long road ahead, and it would not be easy. But this was their chance. This was their moment to build a new future. Together, the humans and the Zelvarians would face their challenges side by side, and maybe, just maybe, they could create something that would outlast them all. A true, lasting alliance. As the meeting continued, Jake found himself more at ease. He was no longer just a mechanic caught up in something beyond his control. He was part of something bigger. He was part of a new beginning. And this time, he wasn't going to let fear hold him back. He was going to give everything he had to make this work. As the discussions progressed, Jake looked over at Lyra. She caught his eye, and he saw in her a quiet gratitude. She believed in him. She had chosen him to help lead their two worlds to a better future. And for the first time, Jake believed that he could do it. Together, they would build a new alliance, a new hope for both Zelvaria and Earth.